Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Curator's Corner. I'm Jeff Seymour, curator and historian here at the National Civil War and Naval Museum. For this episode, I'd like to talk a little bit about the mainstay of an average sailor's sidearms, and this is the cutlass. Now the cutlass is a traditional naval weapon, and many people really associate the cutlass with the age of pirates, but any sailor worth his salt is going to be familiar with this weapon. Now the most common cutlass used during the American Civil War is actually a very new pattern for the U.S. Navy in terms of use. And this is the 1861 Ames contract cutlass. Now this particular cutlass has a slight curve to it and got a little bit of length, but as is markedly different between naval weapons and Army weapons, is naval weapons are a little bit shorter, and that's just because you have a smaller area on a ship. You want to be able to maneuver the weapon. Now, the 1861 Ames, and there are others who make this particular pattern, but it's the Ames company from Massachusetts that produces this particular weapon. Now, if you notice, this cutlass has its leather scabbard with it. There is a row of brass rivets that comes along the seam of the leather scabbard. This is correct for all Ames cutlasses. It's actually very rare that you'll see a weapon with a leather scabbard with it, because this is made of metal, this is leather, this will deteriorate faster. So finding the combination is kind of rare. Now, this is actually a very good example of a blade on one of these. And again, noticing the slight curve, you've only got one side that has an edge on it, and they don't sharpen these things down. It's not practical. One part of it is you'll notice the indentation in the blade. This is what's called the fuller, and that is to provide balance to the blade. This part is typically made out of brass, and this is the covering for the hand. If you get in real close, you'll notice some marks on these blades, and this will help determine if it's real. On the pommel here, this area right here at the tip of the handle, at the top there should be an inspector's mark. It's okay if it's not there, but if it is there, and the inspector for the Ames company during the Civil War is Daniel Reynolds, so you'll see a DR stamped here, or should, not a game killer. But also on one side of the ricasso, this part of the blade here, you should also see a DR. Sometimes you will see a P, which stands for proof. That's not always present, but you'll also see a year stamped in here. And in this case, it's 1862. On the reverse of the ricasso, you'll see the maker's mark, and this is Ames Company, Chicopee, Massachusetts, 1862. On the handle, you've got a piece that extends from the blade through the handle, and this is to provide a way to keep everything together. The handle is covered in a leather grip, and when it's manufactured, it's wound in brass wire around. Before the weapon is actually issued for use aboard a ship, the brass wire is actually removed from this. The idea is that this is just rough enough in an aquatic environment that it's going to provide some grip. Now also notice on these Ames manufactured weapons, the hilt here, the basket around the hilt I should say, you notice that it is riveted here, and this is pretty much a signature of these Ames weapons. And the idea is that these pieces can be taken apart if they are damaged and easily replaced, easily repaired. In 1861, in the spring of 1861, as the war is beginning, the Ames Company received a contract offer from the United States Navy for $4.53 a piece. And over the course of the war, some 25,000 of these cutlasses were produced by Ames. It is a common misconception. Some people call this the 1860 model. However, there is no documentary evidence that there was any conversations between, any correspondence between Ames Company and the federal government over a contract for these weapons. Now, this was a popular change as the war is beginning because sailors hated the older style of cutlass, which is the model 1841 cutlass. Now, notice the big difference between the weapons. Notice the difference between the longer curved blade of the 1861 model and the 1841 model. This is actually basically the Roman gladius, or the short sword. The Navy adopted this one basically because the Ames Company was making a number of other short swords for the artillery, the 1832 pattern artillery short sword. Now, the difference between that and this one began production in 1841, well, the contract was for 1841. You add the extra handle here to provide protection for the hand. And that's the big difference between the two. These are very distinctive because you've got the fish scale handle here. This is all brass. And stamped on both sides of the pommel is the eagle. These also carry markings, but typically these are rack numbers. Notice how frayed the end is here. This is a post-production stamp. This is a rack number. In this case, this is number 167. So imagine being on a larger ship with a crew of 350 men. This is cutlass number 167. Now, there's no way at this point to tell which ship this actually served on. You will also find a maker's mark on the blade. However, this one has been worn away. But you'll also find two distinct proofer's marks, and that is initials on this piece here, one on each side. There were two government inspectors at the Ames Company working during the 1840s. Now, all told, the Ames Company made 6,600 of these blades. At the beginning of the Civil War, there were a number of these that were stockpiled at the Gosport Naval Yard in Norfolk, Virginia. And the Confederates used those. They had to. They issued them to their sailors, and this is the typical cutlass that the Confederate Navy used throughout the war. This cutlass is remarkably like the previous example, except this one is a Confederate made. This is made by Thomas Griswold and Company out of New Orleans. And this is a surviving example of a Confederate weapon. There are also variations. This particular style does not have the basket guard. You'll also notice that you've got an S guard here and a wooden handle. This particular weapon has been traditionally accredited to the Union Car Works out of Virginia. But there is also some evidence that these particular types of weapons, these blades, were made here in Columbus, Georgia. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the same style of blade that you just saw with the Car Works or Columbus pattern. This is actually one that was recovered from the CSS Chattahoochee. Now here you can see where the wooden handle, the grip, has been burned off. And interestingly with this one, instead of a regular nut holding everything together, that is an 1860 United States penny, or I should say cent. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's a brief jaunt through the Cutlass, and please come see these and other artifacts here at the National Civil War Naval Museum.